The megalomania of the Old Kingdom. Imagine a nation where every single resource, every human life, and every grain of wheat is dedicated to one single goal: a mountain of stone. Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, was not just a pharaoh. He was the CEO of the most ambitious and most expensive project in human history. To understand the Great Pyramid, you must stop looking at it as a tomb. In the archives of dark records, we see it for what it truly was: a financial black hole that eventually swallowed the Old Kingdom of Egypt. When Khufu took the throne, Egypt was at the height of its power. But for Khufu, power was not enough. He wanted to defy time itself. He ordered the construction of a monument that required 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. This was not a construction project. It was a total mobilization of the national economy. For 20 years, the entire GDP of Egypt was funneled into a few acres of the Giza Plateau. This was the birth of the pyramid debt. The logistics of starvation. The primary currency of ancient Egypt was not gold, but grain. To feed the estimated 30,000 workers on the Giza site, the state had to collect massive amounts of wheat as taxes from every village along the Nile. This was a brutal extraction process. Scribes traveled from farm to farm, measuring the land and the harvest. If a farmer could not pay his quota, he was beaten or his family was taken into forced labor. The Great Pyramid was literally built on the empty stomachs of the Egyptian peasantry. The logistics were a nightmare. Every day, thousands of tons of food had to be transported to Giza. This required a massive fleet of ships and a bureaucracy that became increasingly aggressive. To maintain the supply chain, the state had to ignore other vital infrastructure. Irrigation canals were left unmaintained, and local defenses were weakened. The Great Pyramid was growing, but the lifeblood of the country was being drained to keep the construction site alive. The forced labor bubble. Historical myths suggest that the pyramids were built by slaves. Archaeological evidence now suggests they were free citizens, but in the world of dark records, we know that free is a relative term. These men were under corvée labor, a system of mandatory state service. While they were provided with bread, onions, and beer, they were taken away from their own farms for months at a time. This created a labor deficit in the countryside, leading to a long-term decline in agricultural productivity. The worker city at Giza was an industrial machine. Thousands of cattle were slaughtered every day to provide protein for the elite stonemasons. While the workers at Giza ate better than the average peasant, the cost was being passed down to the rural population. Khufu was effectively subsidizing his monumental ego by taxing the very survival of his people. The social contract was being stretched to its breaking point, all for a monument that served only one man's vanity. The Copper Crisis and resource depletion to cut and shape to 0.3 million blocks of limestone and granite. The Egyptians needed tools. Thousands of copper chisels and saws were used every day. Copper was a precious resource, mined under extreme conditions in the Sinai Peninsula. The demand from the Giza Plateau was so high that it caused a copper crisis. The pharaoh had to send massive military expeditions to protect the mines and ensure the flow of metal remained constant. The wear and tear on these tools was immense. Tons of copper were literally ground into dust against the hard stone of the pyramid. This was a massive destruction of capital. Instead of using copper for weapons or trade, it was being destroyed in the process of building a tomb. This resource depletion left the Egyptian military weaker and made the country more dependent on expensive imports, further destabilizing the national treasury. The granite debt. The transport of luxury. The inner chambers of the Great Pyramid, including the King's Chamber, are lined with massive blocks of red granite. These blocks, some weighing over 50 tons, were not found near Giza. They had to be quarried in Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. Moving these stones required the largest barges ever built and thousands of rowers. The cost of transporting a single granite block from Aswan to Giza was equivalent to the annual tax revenue of an entire province. Khufu demanded perfection. If a block was cracked during transport, it was discarded, and a new one was ordered. This level of waste was staggering. The Nile became a highway for stone rather than for trade. Merchants had to give way to the royal barges. The commercial economy of Egypt was effectively put on hold for 2 decades to ensure that Khufu's granite walls were flawless. The architectural inflation. Khufu's project set a dangerous precedent. By building the Great Pyramid, he created an expectation of grandeur that his successors tried to match. His son, Kafia, and grandson, Menkaure, also built pyramids at Giza. This was architectural inflation. Each generation tried to prove its divinity through stone, but the resources were running dry. The Pyramid Age was a period of diminishing returns, where the state was spending more and more to achieve less and less. By the end of the Fourth Dynasty, the royal treasury was exhausted. The central government had lost its ability to collect taxes effectively because it had pushed the people too far. The local governors, known as nomarchs, began to realize that the pharaoh was no longer a provider, but a predator. They began to withhold taxes for their own regions, leading to the eventual decentralization and collapse of the Old Kingdom. The Great Pyramid stood as a triumph of engineering, but it was the tombstone of a unified economy, the collapse of the divine monopoly. To manage the massive bureaucracy of the pyramid projects, Khufu had to delegate power to a growing class of officials and priests. These officials demanded their own tombs and their own land grants as payment. This slowly eroded the pharaoh's monopoly on wealth and land. By trying to secure his immortality, Khufu accidentally created the very class of elites that would eventually overthrow the absolute power of the throne. The Great Pyramid was meant to symbolize the eternal stability of the pharaoh. Instead, it became a monument to the limits of power. The debt, financial, social, and environmental, was too high. Following the Fourth Dynasty, the pyramids of Egypt became smaller and lower in quality. The stone was cheaper. The construction was rushed. The age of the giants was over, not because the Egyptians forgot how to build, but because they could no longer afford to dream in stone. The shadow of Giza today. We look at the Great Pyramid with awe. We see the alignment with the stars and the mathematical precision. But Dark Records looks at the shadow. It casts a shadow that lasted for centuries. The Giza debt led to the First Intermediate Period, a time of chaos, famine, and civil war. The Golden Age of the Pyramids was actually a time of extreme economic tension that paved the way for the destruction of the Old Kingdom. Khufu achieved his goal. He is remembered, but his legacy is a warning for every empire. When a leader invests the entire wealth of a nation into a single project of vanity, the fall is inevitable. The Great Pyramid is not just a wonder of the world. It is the most expensive monument to bankruptcy ever built. The stones are silent, but the history of the debt they represent still echoes through the sands of time.